Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, Alicia Beckett couldn't actually believe she was here. She rubbed her eyes in bemusement as she stared out of the dusty window, congealed with so many spider webs that seemed to obscure her view over the overgrown yard. It was probably not good for her lungs to be breathing in all these dust fumes, along with the damp and mould that had spread across the walls like a ravaging cancer. Once she cleaned the place up, of course, things would be significantly better. There was a whole world of things to do, and although it was a tad overwhelming for her, she was not afraid or intimidated by a little hard work, and she knew with a little tender, loving care she could get this rather bedraggled cottage back in shape. Once, of course, the carpenters had fixed up the crumbling wooden frames from the windows, the doors and the floors, and the wooden panelling. She would then repaint the entire cottage from top to bottom and organise a skilled gardening landscaping team to come around to the premises and fix up the yard. She needed to take down all the frayed curtains in every single room and refit the old kitchen with its rather awkward, rackety cupboards that appeared to be falling off their hinges with something far more modern and convenient, but of course with an understated elegance. There were mouse droppings even in the drawers, and incense carcasses lying liberally over everything. There was that nasty stench of urine in the house that seemed to have left an indelible imprint over everything, so that when you came in from outside, everything stank. She couldn't be sure where the actual smell was coming from, but maybe the previous owners had a dog that sprayed urine over everything. She couldn't believe that this once beautiful cottage had been allowed to descend into such rampant decay. It was almost unforgivable. But she was thankful that there were no leaks in the roof, for if that had indeed been the case, Primrose Cottage would probably not be salvageable, despite, of course, the fact that she was here to bring it back to life again, just like it used to be in the good old days. The yard was so pitiful that when she had first seen it, she'd been quite daunted by the prospect of how much work that would need to be undertaken to make it look respectable again, as the whole place was riddled with an infestation of weeds, some so tall and ungainly that walking through them was almost like walking through a field of corn, because you could almost get lost in the undergrowth. It was ridiculous to think that the previous owner, a woman called Dorothy Edge, had allowed things to get this bad. But then again, maybe she hadn't had much money, strength, or even energy to invest in the little cottage. It would seem Dorothy Edge's two older sons had quickly put Primrose Cottage on the market, and their mother had moved into a flat with one of them, residing with them permanently. Some might believe that Alicia was crazy to move into Primrose Cottage in its current less than agreeable condition, for most would not have chosen to do so. It would have been better for her if she'd stayed in a nearby bed and breakfast, while the workmen progressed with fixing up the cottage for her. But Alicia, for her, being in the cottage made her feel so much closer to her late mother that she'd never known in life. Alicia had so many stunning photographs of how prepossessingly charming Primrose Cottage had looked 25 years earlier, and yet now it barely looked like the same place. Back then it had been as pretty as a picture, almost dreamy. But looking around at the chaos that had descended on the place over the last 25 years, like a devastating tsunami, for everything she touched seemed to be crumbling and turning to dust in her hands. It seemed close to impossible to believe that Primrose Cottage had ever been anything special at any time in its life. Rather like an old woman living on the streets, living rough. She had straw in her hair, dirt smeared over her sun-damaged face, clothes on her body that were as crumpled as a tissue paper, and appeared to be no more than rags, showing you a picture of herself in her youth. And you are unable to recognize the photograph of the lady in the picture, with the pretty smile, bright eyes, and beautiful clothes, and perfect porcelain complexion, as the woman you see before you now. Alicia's father, Presley Beckett, was now married to an Australian woman called Pippa, and was happily living in Australia with her. So Alicia missed him terribly, but had no intention of joining him there, for America was her forever home, and she could never conceive of living anywhere else in the entire world. Alicia's father had told her, when her mother Ruth Beckett had seen Primrose Cottage for the very first time, she had looked at him with dewy eyes and said, "But I love it! I love it! But we can't possibly afford it, Prescott, can we?" "Of course we can afford it, my darling," his father had told his wife. "Only the best for you, Ruth." And that day they'd put an offer in with the estate agent, and 2 weeks later the couple had moved in. And Alicia would likely have been raised in the cottage with siblings of her own, if things had not gone so dreadfully pear-shaped, and if tragedy had not struck the Beckett family like a nasty bolt of lightning that you never saw coming. Alicia's parents had been so excited about purchasing Primrose Cottage, rather like a couple of ebullient puppy dogs that can't stop wagging their tails. It was their first home, and they believed it would be absolutely perfect for them to raise a family in it. The spacious cottage with its spectacular views on the backyard that overlooked a farmer's field, where horses would often spend their days eating the hay the farmer provided for them, and liberally galloping around the field at will. Ostensibly Primrose Cottage, in its idyllic countrified setting in New York State, surrounded by a tumble of dusty roads and wood groves of tall, lofty trees, allowed for the Beckett family to enjoy the benefits of living in the great outdoors, and all the adventures that such a lifestyle would embody. It wasn't unusual, of course, to have a couple of deer on your lawn, chewing away contentedly at the grass, or at the spilled juicy apples that had fallen off the tree in the orchard. But at the same time you could walk up the road to be greeted by the bustling energy of a lively place. You could sashay around the small town with a plethora of charming shops available to choose from a butcher's, baker's, grocer's, and a few other specialty shops besides, all owned by locals living in the area. So it was certainly a town, a lively town at that, where everybody knew each other. The Becketts had big dreams of having over 4 children together, possibly more, and shortly after they moved into Primrose Cottage, Ruth Beckett discovered to her joy that she was pregnant, and she had been over the moon when she realized she was going to have a baby. 9 months later, Alicia had been born, and for the first year and a half of their lives, living in Primrose Cottage, things could not have been more perfect for the couple, until they weren't so perfect any more. "Don't you worry," said Alicia, talking to Primrose Cottage lovingly, as if it had ears that could hear and a heart that could respond to her reassuring words. "I'm going to fix you up and make you look even better than you did 25 years ago, when my parents purchased you for the very first time. And that's a promise I'm going to make to you. Others may have given up on you and think you're only good for the wrecking ball, but I have a different opinion. I've got faith in you becoming the beautiful cottage you once were when my parents lived in you." The cottage appeared to remain silent and failed to respond to her soothing words. But Alicia did not care. She was resolutely determined to get Primrose Cottage back on its feet again, looking better than any of the other houses and cottages that adorned the street, overlooking the long stretch of grey asphalt that during her mother's day had been nothing more than a red dusty road. She'd show all the doubters and naysayers in these parts that despite their gravest doubts and biggest misgivings, you can indeed make a silk purse out of a sow's ear if you wanted it enough. And she certainly did. Alicia had longed to visit this charming town when she was growing up as a girl, and where she'd spent her first year and a half of life. She had told herself that one day she would return to the small town, where her parents had been determined to lay down permanent roots, until unfortunately everything had gone so dreadfully wrong. When Alicia had lived with her father and grandmother in her grandmother's brownstone apartment in New York, she'd been too afraid to visit the town, lest her actions would serve to upset her father. But now that he was out of the way, and no longer living on the American map, and living in Australia, the ball was in her court, and she could do what she liked, and that gave her a certain amount of freedom. On the day Alicia had been born, her parents had not been able to get to hospital in time, and Alicia had come out of her mother's birthing canal on the kitchen floor in Primrose Cottage. "You couldn't wait to be born," her father had told her, with a big chuckle that had accentuated the dimples on either side of his handsome face. "I know I'm laughing about it now, but let me tell you, at the time I was in a dreadful panic. It proved to be the best and worst day of my life. In truth, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I would have been much better off equipping a female dog to give birth to a litter of puppies. But your mother was breathing heavily and groaning out in pain, and I lost my mind practically. You were in such a hurry to come out, Alicia, so I had to help your mother by delivering you myself, and I don't mind admitting that the sight of all that blood made me heave. But the woman on the emergency line told me what needed to be done, and she helped me keep my calm, and somehow against the odds I managed to help you come out. It was quite the story, believe me. But when you slipped out of your mother, right on the kitchen floor, and cried for the very first time, me and your mother, we were so elated, absolutely elated. Our horror soon turned into laughter, let me tell you. I'd never seen your mother look so happy." Alicia couldn't believe her good fortune in being able to buy Primrose Cottage, the very same precious beloved cottage her parents had purchased before she was born, where she'd spent the first year and a half of her life, which of course she could no longer remember, as she was very small at the time. But that didn't matter at all. If any of the locals had seen the grin on Alicia's face that she was wearing right now, they would have been genuinely surprised that anyone could be remotely happy about buying Primrose Cottage that was physically falling apart at the seams. But this was so much more than just an ordinary cottage to Alicia. This was everything to her. It helped her feel close to the mother that she had never known in life. She had known coming here, to this small rural town, and purchasing Primrose Cottage would help her at long last feel connected to her late mother, who was all but a stranger to her now. It was when Alicia was 1.5 years old. Her mother had so tragically died in an accident that no one had foreseen. In this sleepy town, life seemed to chug along very contentedly, at a leisurely pace that nobody dictated, so no one ever appeared to be in too much of a rush to stop and say hello to a friend they might bump into on the street corner. Alicia knew how horrifying the accident had been, and the fact that it had occurred in this small town, where things were so quiet, so blissfully serene, seemed incongruous and out of place, almost wrong, you could say. You could imagine a tragedy like this unfolding in a bustling city, with a high populace, and people seemingly running their lives on a hectic schedule. but not in such a laid-back part of the world where time can almost stand still. The day when tragedy had struck this town had been as casual and carefree as any other regular day. There was nothing in the atmosphere that hinted of the horror that was soon to unfold. After everything that transpired that day, Alicia's father, Presley, had been so haunted by the dreadful tragedy that after his wife's death he had promptly sold up Primrose Cottage with an eager efficiency, as if he couldn't bear to live in the small town a moment longer, nor did he want to live in the charming cottage that tortuously reminded him of his dreadful loss. Presley Beckett had taken Alicia to live with him and his mother in New York. Alicia had been raised by her father and by a devoted grandmother in a brownstone apartment, but growing up she had missed the mother that she had never known. When Alicia shared her feelings of great loss with others about losing her mother so tragically at such a young age, few people could comprehend how Alicia could miss someone she'd never known in life. But Alicia felt as if she'd known her mother. She felt connected to the woman who had delivered her in Primrose Cottage on the kitchen floor. And coming to this cottage in this small town for the first time in her life really did make her feel even closer to her mother. It had been on a calm, rather unremarkable Saturday afternoon that Ruth Becker had taken Alicia for a stroll in the pram. "I know it's a bit late in the afternoon, darling," she told her husband Presley, "but I do feel like some fresh air. I think it'll do me good. I feel as if I've been cooped up in the cottage all morning. I'll take a rather vigorous stroll up the street, get some good exercise. I'll go to the corner shop to pick up some milk and cereal from Mr. Lancaster. I'll only be a jiffy." "You enjoy your walk," her father had said, kissing Ruth tenderly on her cheek, not knowing that that would be the very last time he'd get to see his wife. "Don't be long now. I'm sure this little bright button in here will appreciate some fresh air and exercise," he said, giving little Alicia's rosy cheeks a nudge with his finger. Alicia's mother had walked all the way up to the corner shop, where they sold a wide variety of delicious delicatessen food for the locals to enjoy. When Ruth had arrived at Errol Lancaster's shop, known as Lancaster Bakes, she had enjoyed a light-hearted conversation with the man. He'd been owning the grocery store for the last 5 years or so, having taken over the business from his father who had retired. He asked Ruth, as he always did, how she was doing that day, and they were both commenting on what a magnificent sunny afternoon it actually was. Alicia had walked down the street very casually, pushing the stroller ahead of her, and then a car had come out of nowhere, thundering down the road at a mighty speed, and before Alicia could get out of the way, she had been knocked over, and so had the pram containing little Alicia, that had toppled over onto its side, and Alicia was spilt out of the pram. She had fallen onto the road, cocooned in a plethora of blankets, but she had been uninjured, whereas Alicia's mother Ruth did not fare so favourably, as very tragically she didn't survive her injuries, for they were far too severe, so she was pronounced dead on the scene. It would seem a 12-year-old boy called Tommy Tanner had rather recklessly decided to take his father's car out for a spin on that late Saturday afternoon that he had found so drudgerously boring, as there was not very much for him or his friend to do. So why not show off a little and enjoy a head rush? Tommy Tanner's father had been lying asleep on the family's white leather couch, while his car keys lay on the coffee table and were too irresistible not to snatch away. Tommy grabbed the car keys from the table, tucking them into his little pocket, and ebulliently, with a huge triumphant grin on his face, he ran over to his best friend Liam, who was staying at the house at the time. By the looks of things, Tommy Tanner's father was out for the count, and opportunities to misbehave were few and far between for the young boy, as Mr. Tanner was always profoundly aware of what his son Tommy was doing, for he knew he had a son that was inclined to be rather mischievous at the very best of times. This afternoon Tommy Tanner couldn't believe his luck, for his normally astute, highly attentive father, who most usually had eyes at the back of his head that always appeared to be wide open, was now fast asleep, dead to this world, probably because he'd enjoyed a beer for the first time in ages and had grown very sleepy. He was snoring away contentedly on the couch, his head slung towards his left shoulder, and his snores sounded like those of a dog with a flat nose. "Look what I've got here," said Tommy cheekily, jangling his father's keys. "These are my dad's car keys. Fancy going for a spin down the road? I know how to drive Dad's car," he boasted, which wasn't true, of course. "I've been taking lessons with him, and I'm really, really good. I can drive like a rocket. I can shoot to the stars like an astronaut in space." Liam did not look entirely convinced by this, and said, "Show me you can drive." "I don't believe you can. You're lying to me. You're too young to drive. You never told me your dad was teaching you to drive. You're making this all up, aren't you?" "I can drive," Tommy Tanner had boasted. "I can drive really fast. Cross my heart, hope to die if I tell a lie. I'll show you if you don't believe me." "Cross your heart," said Liam. "Let me see you do it." Tommy had done just that. He badly wanted to show off to Liam how fast he could drive, even though he'd never driven before a day in his life. Like so many young boys his age, he had paid close attention to watching his father driving over the years, and really believed that driving was like a walk in the park. He couldn't wait until he was old enough to acquire a driver's license. I mean, how hard could it be to just copy his father's manoeuvres, so he could persuade a very naive, ignorant Liam that he knew exactly what he was doing? Both boys eagerly clambered into Mr. Tanner's car, and Tommy, taking the driver's seat, put his foot on the accelerator and drove out of the family driveway onto the long, red, dusty road. Tommy knew Liam seemed momentarily impressed by the command he appeared to have over his father's car. So Tommy Tanner sped down the road with a lightning speed and a bold confidence that seemed to impress his friend, as for a moment it really did seem that he knew what he was doing. Tommy Tanner had tried to stop the car when he saw Ruth walking on the side of the road, pushing a pram ahead of her. His car seemed to fly over towards the woman, probably because he was focusing his gaze on her. He seemed to lose control of the car as he began to decidedly panic, and became extremely confused and somewhat disorientated. "Stop! Stop!" Liam had cried, trying to grab the wheel of the car from his friend. "There's a lady in the road!" In a knee-jerk reaction, Tommy had accidentally put his foot on the accelerator instead of the brake, and such a foolish manoeuvre was all it had taken to knock Ruth right over on the road, along with the pram. The heavy wheels of Tommy Tanner's father's car had run over Ruth, crushing her entire body, while the pram had gone spinning towards the far corner of the road, depositing a little parcel from its bowels that was no other than Alicia Bennet, who had cried her lungs out when she'd hit the dirt road. Tommy Tanner never forgave himself for what he'd done that day, but being so young he evaded getting into too much trouble, as he was a minor who hadn't really appreciated the gravity of what he was doing, so the law was extremely lenient towards him. But he had certainly learnt a hard lesson, and he did write letters to Alicia's father, apologizing profusely for what he had done. It was very clear the boy was very troubled by the fact that he had killed someone, because he'd been driving like a maniac down that road. Alicia's father, although devastated by Ruth's tragic demise, had visited Tommy Tanner personally and assured him that he was forgiven. He fully appreciated that a 12-year-old boy, on the cusp of becoming a teenager, likely would get into trouble for doing things that were overly ambitious, perhaps, and spur of the moment. That is what can sometimes happen with a teenage boy, and those kind of incidents very often end in disaster. The tragedy meant that Alicia never got to know her mother, and although her grandmother became the loving, devoted maternal figure in her life that raised her diligently, with her father at her side, she always knew not having a mother made her feel that she really had missed out a great deal in her life on a relationship that she deemed would have been extremely precious to her. It had been by random chance, when looking through the property section of the town she longed to visit, where she was born, that Alicia had almost fainted on the spot when she realized to her astonishment that Primrose Cottage had come on the market and was for sale. She knew she had the means to buy the property, so she promptly phoned the estate agent without even batting an eyelid. A young woman called Kitty Gayson, who had been very amenable to her on the phone, answered. "I want to put an offer in on Primrose Cottage. she said unhesitantly. "I understand it's come on the market and it's for sale. I really want to buy it." There had been a long, silent pause at the end of the phone, and Alicia had to ask if the woman was still there, because the phone had become quite dead. "Hello, hello," she called out. "Have I lost a connection?" "No, I'm here," said the estate agent. "Sorry, who did you say was calling? I didn't exactly get your name." "My name's Alicia Beckett." "Beckett," said the woman. "Why does that name sound so extraordinarily familiar? Sorry, what were you saying? You're interested in purchasing Primrose Cottage, are you?" "Yes, that's right. I'd like to put an offer in on the place, if I may." "Sorry, Miss Beckett. It is Miss Beckett. Or is it Mrs.?" "No, it's Miss," said Alicia. "You do realise, Miss Beckett, that Primrose Cottage is in a bad state of repair. I need to warn you about that. The place is going to need an awful lot of work on it, and it's not going to come cheap. Unfortunately, the last owner, an old lady in her 80s, called Mrs. Dorothy Edge, well, she didn't do anything to the cottage, which is very sad, as Primrose Cottage was one of the prettiest cottages in our street at one time, until it wasn't any more. I'm afraid Mrs. Edge pretty much allowed the place to descend into ruin. I'm not sure whether she deliberately neglected it, or was hard up financially, or whether she just didn't care, but she did let the place go to seed, until her 2 sons put the place on the market. It's the one cottage on the street that lets all the other cottages down. It never used to be that way, but unfortunately that's the case now. It needs to be fixed up. Windows are crumbling, paint is peeling. It's in a bad shape. But there is some good news concerning the cottage. It does have good bones, and there are no leaks to the roof, which is a miracle in itself. As for the yard, it looks like a jungle. It really is an eyesore, and an absolute embarrassment. Many people think the place should have been bulldozed a long time ago. I really think, Miss Becker, before you put an offer in for the cottage, you should see it for yourself. I don't want you to suffer from buyer's remorse. I have a couple of beautiful cottages that are up for sale in these parts, and I have to say they're in much more superior condition, and far more desirable than Primrose Cottage. Personally, I'd recommend you take a look at them first, before you part with your hard-earned cash. I don't need to look at any other cottages. I have my mind set on Primrose Cottage. Well, I can see you're very keen, Miss Beckett, and I know I posted Primrose Cottage online, but I want to assure you it looks much better online than in real life. I strongly advise you see Primrose Cottage first, before you make any grand gestures with that checkbook of yours." "Very well, Mrs. Gayson. I'll see the place then, as you suggest I should. Even though I want to assure you my mind is made up about Primrose Cottage, I do want to buy the place." Alicia had been secretly impressed by Kitty Gayson's integrity, for many of the estate agents she had known over the years were very quick to snap up an offer, without warning you about any pitfalls you might potentially experience in buying a property you hadn't seen first. Alicia had agreed to meet Mrs. Gayson for a viewing on a Friday morning, but what Mrs. Gayson failed to appreciate was that it pretty much didn't matter how bad a state Primrose Cottage might be in. Come hell or high water, she was going to buy the place. When Alicia had first driven through the small, charming town, her heart had wobbled unsteadily in her chest, for this was the first time in her life she had visited the place, and on seeing it she had fallen in love with it straight away. She could seriously imagine herself laying down roots here. It was when she drove up to the only ramshackle cottage in the street, that was obviously an eyesore. She knew this must be Primrose Cottage, the place she intended to buy, where she'd been born 25 years earlier, on a cold kitchen floor. The cottage was a sorry sight for very sore eyes. Mrs. Kitty Gayson was a young woman who was a year older than Alicia was, so that made her close to 28 years old. She wore a brown pigtail away from her face. Her skin was clear and translucent, but what got Alicia's attention first was her kind brown eyes, that made her extremely likeable. "Hello, I'm so pleased to meet you," she said, stepping forward. "You must be Alicia Beckett." She took Alicia's hand firmly in hers. "You're from New York, is that right?" "That's right," said Alicia. "So what do you think?" said Mrs. Gayson, pointing to the cottage. "This is Primrose Cottage, of course. I did warn you, it is a sorry sight. The yard is a complete embarrassment, I'm afraid. You'd think Dorothy Edge's 2 sons, who are over 6 foot tall, healthy and robust, I have to tell you, would at the very least fix up the yard before putting the place up for sale, but they insisted on putting it on the market as is. They were far too lazy to do any rudimentary repairs, even if it meant getting more for the cottage. Some people, she said, rolling her eyes in exasperation, are the absolute end, aren't they? Anything for an easy life, it would seem. Still, if there are any bonuses, the price for Primrose Cottage has been radically reduced, given how much work needs to be done on the place to bring it back to a somewhat respectable condition. The cottage looked worse than I thought it would, Alicia admitted rather flatly. I can't believe Dorothy Edge let it get this bad. It looked a lot better online, you're right about that. You weren't exaggerating. Well, I don't think Dorothy Edge had that much money, to be fair. Well, that's the impression I got anyway. But then again, you never really know, do you? Said Kitty Gayson. Shame on her 2 sons for not helping her out when they could see their mother was living in such abject chaos. Apparently she was a hoarder, you know the type. Someone who collects a whole heap of rubbish that they believe they'll use one day, and it never happens, so they end up living a life surrounded by so many things and so much clutter that have no earthly use whatsoever. So much so that you could barely walk in the cottage without falling over piles of newspaper and magazines. I think she also had 6 cats that were spraying urine all over the place. I gather her 2 sons had a tough time persuading Dorothy to part with all her stuff, most of which was junk, of course. She had quite a tantrum, I believe, about so many things being binned, like newspapers that date back to the early 60s. As for the yard, her 2 perfectly able sons, as I was telling you, could have run a lawnmower over the property, but no, they didn't bother to help out at all. So typical. They were eager, of course, to toss out her piles of junk. I'm told there were 2 lorry loads of her junk that left Primrose Cottage on its way to the local dumpster. That poor woman must have been living in squalor. Anyway, Primrose Cottage is on the market now, and Dorothy's sons are keen to get a good sale for the place. But no one is lining up to buy the cottage, and when I took someone around it recently, they almost gagged, the smell was so bad. Would you like me to show you the 2 other cottages I mentioned to you on the phone? They're in great condition and don't need to be fixed up. But Primrose Cottage, where do you start? My dad said that they should put a bulldozer over the cottage and be done with it. But then again, he can be quite brutal like that. But Primrose Cottage has got good bones, hasn't it? Alicia asked. Oh yes, it's got excellent bones. That's what my father was even saying. But then again, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the cottage. It's not going to be a walk in the park, is it? I'd like to see around the place, if I may, Alicia had asked. Kitty Gayson's face tried to remain expressionless, but it was obvious she was rather shocked that Alicia, after having seen the outside of Primrose Cottage and the dreadful state it was in, had expressed an interest in still seeing around the place. And after she had viewed the place, she took Kitty further aback by resolutely saying, "Yes, I want Primrose Cottage. I'm going to put an offer in at once." "But are you absolutely sure?" Kitty had asked. "It's going to be a big undertaking to fix the place up. You're going to need carpenters, plumbers, and God knows who else. Where do I start? It'll take an entire gardening team, and a skilled one at that, to fix up the yard. Some of those weeds, well, they're extremely fearsome." "I know, but I really want to turn Primrose Cottage around," said Alicia, with a fearsome determination. "And I believe if anyone can do it, I can, even if it is a little intimidating." Kitty Gayson had looked somewhat perplexed by Alicia's determination to buy the place. In all her years as a real estate agent in the area, she didn't believe she'd ever met anyone more resolute than Candy appeared to be. "If you really want to know why I have such a vested interest in Primrose Cottage, I'll tell you. It was because I was born here, on the kitchen floor." "You were?" "Yes, I was. My parents bought Primrose Cottage before I was born. My mother fell in love with the place, you see. My dad couldn't really afford to buy it for her, but he somehow managed to make it happen. He adored my mother, you see. Theirs was a wonderful love story. They fell passionately in love with each other. My father rescued my mother's dog when it got stranded in an iced-up pond at the local park. My father nearly fell through the ice himself, while he managed to rescue the dog. I gather he got soaked to the skin and was shivering like mad. My mother lived close to the park at the time, on the opposite side of the road. She brought my dad back home with her. He had a warm shower and a change of clothes. My mother gave him some of her father's clothes to wear, while she rubbed her dog dry. And that is where their love story began. My father invited my mother out for coffee the very next morning, and well after that they couldn't get enough of each other. And the rest is history, of course. Wow, that is a romantic story! Some of those ponds, when they're iced up in winter, are absolutely treacherous. Your surname? Asked Kitty Gayson. Beckett. I knew the name from somewhere. Kitty's face suddenly paled. Oh, my goodness! Your mother wasn't Ruth Beckett, was she? That's right. My mother was Ruth. That was her name. I don't believe it. You're not going to believe this, but your mother was my mother's best friend. My mother's name is Lily Barber. I was Kitty Barber before I got married very recently to my husband. Now our name is Barbara Stokes, which I kind of like. My mother would love to meet you sometime, I'm most sure. She was absolutely devastated when your mother was mown down in the road by Tommy Tanner all those years ago. It was such a tragedy for this small town, one that has never been forgotten. I'm so dreadfully sorry about what happened to your mother. It really was tragic. Tommy Tanner's father couldn't believe his 12-year-old son took his car out for a joyride to show off to his best friend. All the time he couldn't even drive, but I guess let's just say boys of that age, so close to their teens, can be a little obnoxious at the best of times. Tommy Tanner doesn't live here anymore in this town, but the Tanners still remain here, and are much loved by the local community. They're extremely good people, you know, who everybody likes. It broke their hearts to learn their son was responsible for your mother's tragic demise. I must have been about 2.5 years old when the tragedy occurred. You were about 1.5, so I was a year older than you are. The Tanners also have a late lamb that is my age. He still lives in town, but their 3 other children now live in other states. People around here drive with due care, because it's a small, sleepy town. But Tommy Tanner that day decided to speed and mistook the accelerator for the brakes, which can easily happen, I suppose, if you don't exactly know what you're doing. True enough, Alicia agreed. It was a tragic accident. My father long forgave Tommy Tanner. The boy was devastated that he'd caused so much suffering. That's true. I felt desperately sorry for Tommy Tanner when I learnt about the story. Let's just say when he was old enough he couldn't leave this small town fast enough. I guess the reminder of what he'd done all those years ago was all too much for him. I understand he's actually involved in the auto repair business these days. He lives in Lexington, Kentucky, I believe. You were in the pram, weren't you, when the accident happened? You survived, which is such a relief. It would have been even more tragic if you had lost your life alongside your mother's. I understand the church was packed for your mother's funeral, and there wasn't a single dry eye in the house. Everyone was shaken up, and all the young children everywhere were lectured by their parents never ever to attempt taking their cars out for a joyride. So some tough lessons were learnt after that calamity with Tommy Tanner. So some good came out of the bad, I suppose. I can't believe you know my mother's story, said Alicia with wide, appreciative eyes. I would have thought the small town would have forgotten about it a long time ago. Well, I knew the surname Beckett, didn't I? But I couldn't place you by your name. It was niggling away at me, as I knew it from somewhere. I can't believe you came back here after all this time. My mother said your dad was so devastated that your mother was run down, that he sold Primrose Cottage almost at once and returned to New York, where he moved in with his mother, your grandmother, I suspect. We never saw sight or sound of him ever again, even though he made dozens of friends here. I suppose he wanted a brand new start. He wanted to forget about what happened to his wife. And who can blame him for that? I don't think he even bothered to come back to visit the graveyard where your mother is buried. Perhaps it was just too traumatic for him. Oh, I thought my mother was cremated. I thought her ashes were thrown over the ocean. My dad said she loved the sea. He gave me the distinct impression that that was where my mother's ashes were scattered. I had no idea she was buried, and that her grave was in a local cemetery. "That is news to me," said Alicia, looking stunned. "Your father told you that your mother's ashes are sprinkled out at sea, did he?" asked Kitty, looking puzzled. "That's rather strange. Your mother's grave is not very far from here. It's at the cemetery, surrounded by lots of woods. It's a magnificent place to be buried, let me tell you. So peaceful there. Maybe you can go and visit your mum's grave at the cemetery sometime. Lay flowers at her resting place. I'll definitely be doing that." "How is your father these days?" asked Kitty. "Of course I never knew him, but my mother was only talking about him the other day, and about the tragic accident that hit everyone so hard in this small town. She was saying she wondered how you and your father were doing, and now here you are. I mean, talk of the devil! I mean, talk about chance coincidence. My dad's doing very well. I think for the first 20 years or so it was a different story. He was grieving for my mother all that time. After the tragedy, me and my father moved in with my grandmother into her brownstone apartment, and he got a great job in New York. But he was always looking at photographs of my mother growing up. He always looked so desperately sad. He swore blind he'd never marry again, but that all changed when he met the woman from Australia, who stopped him in the street one day, asking him for directions. We get a lot of foreigners visiting New York, you see. New Yorkers tend to be friendly people and very helpful, and my father's no exception to that. He wasn't doing anything that day, so he offered to give this lovely lady a tour around New York. He felt sorry for Celia. That's the name of the new wife he's married to. So he took her round about the place, and they fell in love. So now he's living there in Australia with Celia, who has 2 adult children of her own, who are about my age. "Wow, what an incredible story," said Kitty, looking suitably impressed. "But you haven't answered my question, Alicia. Why would you come back to this small town, which is the scene of a great tragedy that happened a long time ago, when your mother was killed? Furthermore, why would you want to buy your old family property, especially given the fact that Primrose Cottage is in need of a great deal of work?" "I guess to answer your question, I want to feel close to the mother I never knew, as strange as that may sound. I couldn't believe it when I saw Primrose Cottage online, because I knew how much she had loved this place in life. And when I realized it was for sale, it was a win-win situation for me, which was why I phoned you immediately and put an offer in at once. I didn't even hesitate for a second. Buying the place seemed like the right thing to do." "Well, you certainly seem pretty determined to fix up Primrose Cottage. And I guess if anyone can do it, it's you," said Kitty Gayson, looking significantly confident that she believed what she was saying was indeed true. "This is a small town. People here have long memories, you know. And when they learn a member of the Beckett family is back at home, well, they'll be pleased to hear that. Don't be surprised if you're inundated with dinner requests from the locals eager to make your acquaintance. Everyone is extremely friendly around here, probably even friendlier than in New York. A lot of people that were around when your mother was alive are still here. Errol Lancaster, for example. He still runs the corner shop at the top of the road, which is called Lancaster Bakes. He's turned the place into a charming delicatessens cum bakery. I understand on the afternoon of your mother's death, he was the last person to actually see her alive. He said she bought milk and cereal from him, and together they talked happily about what a lovely afternoon it was. I gather the accident happened at the beginning of spring, so people were peeling away their winter clothes and embracing the warmer days. On the day your mother died, the weather was so close to perfect. There were daffodils everywhere, I'm told. Errol Lancaster told me that your mother looked very pretty that day. She was wearing a rather becoming summer frock, covered with pretty pink flowers, along with a matching pink belt. He said she looked amazing and seemed very happy. You could see she loved being a mother to you. He bid her farewell, and then she went on her merry way. He had no idea that that would be the last time he'd get to see your mother alive. He told me that your mother used to love northern cardinals. You know that very pretty red bird, the bird you often see in people's yards. Yes, I know the one. I love those birds. Such a pretty colour they are. Well, Mr. Lancaster told my mother that after your mother's tragic death, for 3 mornings in a row at his own kitchen window, he witnessed a red cardinal pecking at the window, looking in at him and his wife. They both believed it was your mother, letting them know she was at peace from beyond the grave. They told your father about the startling incident, and he claimed there'd also been a red cardinal at his kitchen window. So those are signs, I believe, from your late mother. I'm a believer that the dead leave signs for us to see, but too many of us are just not paying enough attention to actually receive them. I guess you're right about that. Over the years I've never noticed anything myself in regards to strange signs. But I had an incongruous determination to come back to this small town, and I did happen to stumble across, Primrose Cottage being for sale online, and that in itself is miraculous. Well, who knows? It could be your mother who brought you here. Well, I hadn't thought of it like that, but maybe you're right. Of course I'm right, said Kitty, giving Alicia a naughty wink. One thing you'll learn about me soon enough is I'm right about almost everything. I think when Errol Lancaster learns that you've moved back to town, well, he's going to be one big happy man. Let's just say the baby knocked over on the road in her pram, surviving the accident, is somewhat a celebrity around here. So do you really want to put an offer in for Primrose Cottage? Are you really going to do it? Absolutely, Alicia had said, and she had done just that. 3 weeks later, Alicia had moved into the cottage. Many locals had invited her to stay with them, while Primrose Cottage was being fixed up by the contractors. In the beginning, Alicia wanted to remain in Primrose Cottage, while the work was being undertaken. The locals in the community had been warmly welcoming towards her, and as Kitty had told her, she was definitely a celebrity of note. Even a framed old newspaper article about the tragedy was hanging up on a board in the local butchery for all to see, as if people in the small town were determined never to forget what had happened that fateful day. Kitty had been wonderful. She had taken Alicia on a guided tour around town, introducing her to everyone, apart from the Tanners, of course. It would seem she was rather concerned about how the Tanners might react to Alicia's presence in town. She thought Mr. Tanner might take it hard, and so it was best not to tell him for the time being, although doubtlessly he'd find out sooner or later, for nothing remains secret in a small town for very long. Alicia had met Errol Lancaster, the man who owned the corner shop in town, called Lancaster Bakes. He was a jolly man, with big brown eyes and 2 large dimples on both sides of his cheeks, that made him look a lot younger than his natural years, for he had that quintessential boyish look, which is somewhat ageless. But his receding hairline and wispy thin greying hair might make you take a second guess at his age. The larger-than-life man that everyone in town loved, for he played the role of being a father figure to so many. He was considerate and very kind and generous by nature. He always left a water bowl outside his shop in the summer months so that people's dogs could enjoy a cooling drink of water on a scorchingly hot summer's day. Errol, I've got someone you may be interested in meeting here. Do you recognize who this young woman is? Said Kitty, smiling broadly. Errol Lancaster's beautiful shop smelt of cinnamon buns. Not only did the man have a delectable bakery, displaying all kinds of delicious goods, but he had a delicatessence of note that sold the most mouth-watering selection of cheeses, olives, and cold meats. Can you guess, Mr. Lancaster? No, it can't be, said Mr. Lancaster, staring at Alicia in wondrous awe, as if he'd been dumbstruck by a real Picasso proudly hanging in a museum of fine art. For a moment Errol Lancaster said absolutely nothing, but continued to stare almost rudely at Alicia, as if he was caught up in some kind of bizarre trance. Then he said, You've got to be Alicia Becker. You are Ruth Becker's child, are you not? The baby that was knocked over in the pram all those years ago by Tommy Tanner. You're back in town. That's incredibly good news, he said, looking decidedly pleased. You really recognize me? Asked Alicia, looking somewhat stumped, that Mr. Lancaster had figured out who she actually was. Well, I don't recognize you from when you were a baby, of course. You were a wee tiny thing back then. But I recognize you from your mother. I knew your mother very well. And let's just say you're the splitting image of her. And when I saw you, I thought I was seeing her ghost. I don't mind admitting for a moment I was shaking like a baby's rattle. I'm so sorry, Mr. Lancaster. I didn't mean to give you a fright, said Alicia. My father tells me I do look enormously like my mother, but I didn't know that my likeness to her would be so startling to you. You, young lady, are almost her doppelganger. So yes, I got a bit of a shock, but the good kind of shock, of course. I'm very pleased to meet you, Alicia, and I'm very glad you've come to live among us. What an absolute privilege. None of us in our small town ever forgot your mother Ruth, you know. What a special woman she was, and what a tragedy that her life was cut so cruelly short in such unforeseen, bizarre circumstances, he said, shaking his head very sadly. Everyone in town mourned your mother's tragic passing. Nothing dramatic ever happens in our small town, and it still doesn't, I have to say. But on that day everything went badly awry. So much so that no one could have foreseen what was to happen. I remember my wife woke up early that morning with a splitting migraine headache, and she told me that it was going to be a horrible day for all of us. My wife was very intuitive like that, you see. She had a profound sense it wasn't going to be a good day. But even she could never have envisaged what would soon unfold. I know my wife would be delighted to meet you, Alicia, in person. She was extremely fond of your mother. They often got together for a regular cup of coffee, to have a good old chinwag as women so often do.
Well, I look forward to meeting her, Mr. Lancaster.
Oh, please call me Errol. I've already taken the liberty of calling you Alicia, have I not?
I understand, Errol, that you were the last person to see my mother alive. Is that really true?
That is true. Your mother brought you into this very same shop in your pram. You were a sweet little thing, all smiles you were, with the biggest cornflower blue eyes that I ever did see. They took up your entire face, they were so large. You were a wee bonny thing even then. I told Ruth that you looked just like her. She was pleased with the compliment, but I meant it, of course. But now you're her spitting image.
So how was my mother on the afternoon you saw her? Asked Alicia. I know I'm asking you something that happened a long time ago. But you see, I want to talk to all the people who knew her, so I can get to know her a little better myself, through the memories of other people, if you know what I mean. Mr. Lancaster hung his head sadly.
Of course I understand, Alicia. It makes perfect sense to me. It must have been very hard for you, never having the opportunity of getting to know your mother in person, having to rely on other people's memories to get a full picture of what she was like. You're in luck, because one of my finer qualities is I have a pristine memory for some reason. I never ever forget a person's name. And there are indelible days in my life that I simply cannot forget, going back to my early childhood. I even remember dates, birthdays, what the weather was like back then. So yes, I do remember every last detail of your mother's visit to my shop.
You do, Mr. Lancaster? Asked Alicia, looking delighted.
Yes, I remember your mother vividly, along with that day, I hasten to say,
said Mr. Lancaster, his brown eyes lighting up, so much so that the dimples around the edges of his mouth became all the more pronounced, giving him such a boyish look that for a brief moment he suddenly looked terribly young.
Your mother, well, she looked lovely, so radiant that day. I could tell she was extremely proud of you. She came into my shop to buy cereal and milk. I think she chose Weet-Bix for herself. She was running out of it at home, you see. Back in your mother's time, people would drop around to my shop to buy the essentials, or things they'd forgotten, like sugar or bread. But nowadays I stock some incredibly delicious baked goods, as you can see, along with a fabulous selection of cold meats that weren't available in your mother's day. So people in the town walk up to my shop to buy my famous cinnamon buns, apple fritters, and a large selection of very delicious doughnuts, of which the Boston cream, I have to tell you, is the most popular. Among the locals, that is, although I will say the maple and bacon doughnut scores a close second. I sometimes wonder what your mother would think of my shop right now, if she were to see it, that is.
I'm sure she'd be blown away by it, Mr. Lancaster. You've come a long way, it would seem, said Alicia, taking stock of Mr. Lancaster's shop. This place is a small piece of heaven, is it not?
Well, I'm glad you think so, Alicia. It's very kind of you to say. I rather think your mother would have been partial to my apple fritters. If she were alive today, she would certainly love them. She always made apple pies, you know. Your mother loved apple pie. She enjoyed walking to the corner shop and having a chat with me. I also think she enjoyed showing you off to everyone. You were always wearing yellow, as before you were born your mother prepared your whole wardrobe in yellow. As I understand, she didn't know whether you were a girl or a boy, so she said it was safe to buy yellow. So you were always dressed in yellow. Anyway, on the day you came into the store with your mother, I remarked that you were wearing pink for the very first time, and she said that she had thrown out all your yellow clothes, and from now on you'd be wearing pinks and whites, so that everyone would know you were a girl. Your mother was annoyed because someone had mistaken you for being a boy wearing that yellow outfit, and she was having none of that. Your mother said it was the first day she had worn a summer dress, because the weather was so warm. She was commenting about all the daffodils that were all over the place, and how glad that she was that the winter was finally behind us. She walked out of my shop with my purchases in a big net bag of hers. She always carried that bag with her wherever she went. It was quite a thing in those days, having net bags, because they stretched so you could literally carry around a sizable amount of stuff in them. Little did I know that that would be the last time I would ever see your mother again.
Kitty over here told me that after Mum died, you claimed for 3 days in a row there was a red cardinal at your kitchen window. Is that really true, Errol? Asked Alicia, eager to have Mr. Lancaster confirm that this bizarre, idiosyncratic event had indeed occurred.
Oh, that did happen,
said Errol, his face lighting up again.
It was ironic, you know. Only a week before your mother died, she was telling me how much she loved red cardinals. She said they were her favourite garden bird, and that if she had to be a bird, it would be a red cardinal. Lo and behold, after she dies, I see a red cardinal at the kitchen window for 3 days in a row, at exactly the same time of 7:30 in the morning. The bird stood on the windowsill for about 5 minutes, and then flew away, repeating the same behaviour for another 2 days. I hasten to say, it never occurred again. My wife said it was definitely a sign from your late mother, that she was saying goodbye to us.
That is extraordinary, Alicia admitted. I've always been rather partial to red cardinals myself. It would seem that when the building construction team had started fixing up Primrose Cottage, it got all too much for Alicia, so she accepted Kitty's mother's kind invitation to stay at her house for the time being, because the cottage smelt of paint mingled with dust and glue, and it was so suffocating and nauseous, especially the dust fumes around the place, which made her want to wheeze the whole time. Lily had welcomed Alicia into her home, like a long-lost daughter that she hadn't seen in a long while, and much like Errol Lancaster, she stood in the doorway when Alicia made her approach, her eyes widening in astonishment, as if seeing Alicia for the first time had taken her quite aback. Alicia was sure she physically gasped for a brief moment as she stood there in the doorway, frozen like a statue, and then all of a sudden Lily seemed to bounce out of her frozen state, and much like Errol Lancaster had done, she threw her arms rather ebulliently around her, and there had been tears gathering in her eyes that had spilled down her cheeks. Linda was a slender woman with short-cropped pixie-like hair, dyed a pretty honey blonde colour. She had kind, generous eyes, and a porcelain complexion that was translucent. She looked to be like an older version of Kitty herself. Alicia warmed to Lily immediately, for much like Kitty, she had an engaging personality. "You mustn't mind me, dear," she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "When Errol told me you were the splitting image of your mother, I never envisaged the likeness would be so profound. You must excuse the rude way I gawked at you. Goodness gracious me, I feel utterly flustered now. It's as if your mother has just walked through the doorway. You are just her double. It's giving me goosebumps," she said, running a hand down her arm. "Don't worry about it," said Alicia, smiling. "It's a big compliment to be told I look like her." "Well, it sure is. Your mother was a very good-looking woman. For the record, Alicia, I'm so glad you've come to live in our small town. You're welcome to stay here in my cottage for as long as you like. The more the merrier, that's what I say." "It's very kind of you," said Alicia. "You're all so friendly around here." "But of course we're all friendly around here," said Lily.
Let me assure you the locals in these parts will be delighted that you've returned home after all this time. It was such a devastating tragedy what happened to your dear mother all those years ago. Most unfair it was. It still haunts me to this very day. Do you mind me asking, dear, why you're buying your mother's cottage and moving back to town? Please tell me to mind my own business if I'm being too snoopy." This time it was Kitty who interjected on Alicia's behalf. "You are being snoopy, Mum. If you must know, Alicia is here because she discovered Primrose Cottage was for sale online, and she knew it was the cottage where she was born, so she wanted to buy it. She's never visited the town before, since her mother's passing, but she felt compelled to come here. Isn't that right, Alicia?" "That's right," Alicia admitted. "I don't even know why I came here, to be honest with you, but it just felt like the right thing to do, if you know what I mean." "Of course I know what you mean," said Lily. "It makes perfect sense to me. I don't think it's a mere accident that you came back to this town, the place where you were born. I don't believe in coincidences. Never have, you know. It sounds to me that the fact that you stumbled on the cottage being for sale online, that you were divinely led here. There are no accidents in this life. Maybe you were meant to be here." "I hope you're right," said Alicia. "Some people think I've taken on more than I can chew buying my mother's cottage, given it's in such a bad state of repair." "Well, I think it's wonderful, Alicia, that you're fixing up Primrose Cottage. It's been an eyesore around here for long enough, and no one's done a thing about it, which is an awful shame if you ask me. Believe it or not, it used to be the bonniest cottage on the street, enviably so. But old Dorothy Edge, she was a notorious hoarder, you know. She allowed the place to quickly descend into decay." "But, Mum, Primrose Cottage is a sorry sight now, but it's got good bones." "Oh, but it has," Lily agreed. "Very good bones. It's structurally sound, and there are no leaks in the roof. So my bet is that once you fix up the cottage, Alicia, it'll be a showstopper once again, like it was back in its day. I'll say this, though. I think you've got a lot of work on your hands. But good on you, love, for taking such a daunting challenge on your plate. Your mother would be proud of you, you know. When she saw Primrose Cottage all those years ago, she fell in love with the place. It is very good to have a young person such as yourself moving to our small town. All too often, I'm afraid to say, the young folk around here go off to seek their fortunes elsewhere, in New York or other big cities. But you're coming here. Well, it's fabulous news, very refreshing. What is it you do for a living, my dear, if you don't mind my asking you?" "Of course I don't mind your asking, Lily. I'm an open book, so to speak. I just work for a regular company in New York. I write articles for them, newsletters, reports, and so forth. I'm lucky because I can work online from home, so I don't have to go into work. I only have to touch base a few times a year, with my boss, that is. So I'm very lucky." "Well, that's very good news," said Lily, rubbing her slim hands rather gleefully. "This modern-day technology is changing people's lives, is it not?" she said, looking genuinely thrilled that Alicia had come back into their lives again. "I'm glad you're staying in my cottage for a while, Alicia. I've got so many stories to share with you about your late mother. She and I were the best of friends, you know. You should have seen her when she fell pregnant with you. She shouted it from the rooftops that she was having a baby. There was no secrecy with her whatsoever. She was so delighted. And when you were born, there wasn't a day that went by that she didn't have the biggest smile on her face. I'd never seen her so pleased as she was after you were born. She told everybody about your delivery, on the kitchen floor, of course. It was all over town, that story." All of a sudden Lily's face paled, almost as if a rather unsavoury thought had just crossed her mind. "Good Lord! Does Mr. Tanner know you're in town, Alicia?" "No, Mum, he doesn't," said Kitty, answering for Alicia. "If you must know, he doesn't know anything about Alicia. Well, not yet. And I think it should stay that way, don't you? I mean, if he learns that Ruth Beckett's child is in town, it'll open up some painful wounds for him. He's suffered enough already, don't you think, Mum? And knowing Alicia's back, well, it might rub some salt in the wound. He always blamed himself for what Tommy did, when it was never his fault, was it?" How was he supposed to know that Tommy would go joyriding that day, causing pandemonium everywhere? It was all a dreadful accident. Of course it was an accident, Kitty. Don't get so defensive, love. Everybody knows that. I don't dispute that for a single second. But I'm not sure that you can keep a secret like this from the Tanners for very long. That's all I'm saying. For a start, people talk in our small town. Mrs. Silver Carraway, for example, is quite the gossip. She's the very worst. If that woman learns about Alicia, the secret will be out, let me tell you. She's got about as much tact as a rhinoceros. If I know her, she'll be slamming on the Tanners' front door, telling them Alicia's in town. She certainly loves to stir that pot. Oh dear, said Alicia with an unfortunate sigh. I don't want to think my presence in town might upset people, especially the Tanners. Like you say, none of what happened to my mother was Mr. Tanner's fault. So I hope he doesn't blame himself. Never you mind, dear, said Lily kindly, putting a reassuring arm around Alicia. Don't you dare fret, my girl. I guess sooner or later the Tanners are going to have to find out the truth. Silver will see to that, I'm sure of it. And there's not much we can do about it. That woman is a garrulous chatterbox. I do know that Mr. Tanner visits your mother's grave at the cemetery to lay down flowers for her every week. He's a very good man, you know. About the cemetery, Kitty interjected. Alicia didn't even know her mother was buried at the local graveyard. Nor did she know that the Tanners paid for her gravestone. She thought her mother was scattered out at sea. Oh, good gracious me! Where did you get that idea from? Your mother would have hated that. But Dad said my mother loved the sea. I automatically assumed that what he was saying, that he scattered her ashes over the water there. Yes, your mother did love the ocean. That was true enough. But she had strong views on being buried, you know. She said she'd never, ever want to be cremated. She liked the idea of being buried in a pretty graveyard. So she got her wish fulfilled, I'm very glad to say. She told you that? Asked Alicia, looking somewhat flawed. My mother was a young person. She was a little older than I am now. It's hard for me to conceive what I would want to do with my remains when I die. I don't even think of things like that. It's so morbid thinking about death, don't you think? And when you're young, it's not a subject that really crosses your mind. Until much later in life, I rather suspect. You make a very good point, dear, said Lily. I'm just trying to think about how me and your mother got on to the subject of how she wanted to be buried. It is rather curious. Oh, I remember now, she said, a light going on in her eyes. Your mother was telling me she was going to a funeral in New York of an old friend of hers called Helen, who died tragically from a diabetic episode. I think Helen had been born with type 1 diabetes. Your mother was sitting at the kitchen table in absolute tears. She couldn't believe that her best friend Helen from New York had died. She was so upset about the whole thing. But she told me that Helen wanted to be buried, and she wanted to make sure that her wishes were fulfilled. Anyway, that was when she began to discuss her own mortality. That was when she told me that if she were to die, she would definitely want to be buried. She hated the idea of being cremated. She thought that would be the most dreadful thing to happen to her body. She liked the idea of being buried in a pretty graveyard, surrounded by flowers and trees. So we got her wish fulfilled, because I was able to tell your father exactly what she wanted. So she never had to be cremated. And that's one thing I feel very happy about. You don't think my mother thought she might die young, Lily, do you? Asked Alicia. It just seems rather extraordinary to me that she would talk about how she wished to be buried. It's strange that she would bring all that up, don't you think? I can't answer your question, love. I really can't. Whether your mother had a sense of whether she would die young or not, she must have kept that to herself. Although I do agree with you. It is profoundly strange for your mother to go into detail about how she wanted to be buried. Who knows? Maybe she did know that she would have a short life. Well, maybe she wasn't conscious that she'd die young, but deep down inside herself, maybe she knew she would, said Alicia. Who knows, dear? You really must go and see your mother's grave at the cemetery. I'm rather surprised your father never told you about it. I'm even more taken aback that he gave you the impression your mother's ashes were scattered at sea. That was very naughty of him to tell you that." "Well, maybe Alicia's father didn't want her to know about her mother's grave," said Kitty. "Why ever not?" asked Lily. "Surely he'd understand that Alicia would want to pay her mother's grave a visit at some point. I mean, if my mother died at a young age, and I'd never known her in life, you can bet your bottom dollar I'd visit her resting place rather regularly. And if my father kept such important information from me, well, I wouldn't be impressed with him, let me tell you that." "Maybe Alicia's father didn't want Alicia to come back to this town," said Kitty firmly. "I can understand his reasoning in a manner of speaking. Maybe it was just too traumatic for him, and he wanted to draw a line in the sand and forget about what had happened to his late wife. I guess he didn't want Alicia to come here, or to visit the graveyard, for it might reopen all the wounds of his grief. Nobody likes to be reminded of the tragic things that have happened in their lives, do they? People want to forget about them. Maybe that's why her dad went off to live in Australia. A new start, far away from home perhaps, where he could enjoy a brand new beginning with someone else. Think about it. It makes perfect sense to me." "You make a great point, Kitty," said Alicia, who was evaluating what Kitty was saying about her mother. "You're right. If I'd known about my mother's gravesite, I'd have visited this town a long time ago. I think my father would have been grievously upset about that. I suspect it would bring the memories of how my mother died right back to him. That's maybe why he kept all this from me. He even advised me not to visit the small town where I was born. He said he didn't think it would be a good idea." Lily nodded. "Well, I suppose grief affects us all very differently, does it not? I do know that after Ruth died, your father couldn't get away from this town fast enough. After that funeral, a few days later, he bundled you up in the back of his car with all your diapers and baby things. He left Primrose Cottage, organizing for the estate agents to sell up the place at once, along with all its furnishings. He didn't want any of it. It brings me to my next question, Alicia. I do apologize for being so nosy, but does your father know you've returned to the small sleepy town where you were born, and that you've bought Primrose Cottage?" Alicia paled. "To tell you the truth, I'm terrified to tell him, Lily. I don't want him to know I've bought Primrose Cottage. Well, not yet. And I don't want to tell him I've returned to the small town either. Let's just say I don't think he'd be best pleased if he knew this, and that I was residing in the very cottage that he and Mum originally bought all those years ago. I know he's happily living in Australia on the Gold Coast with his new wife, and there's enough distance between us for him to assume I'm still living in New York. And my grandmother's agreed not to say anything about my move. But sooner or later I'm going to have to tell him the truth. I don't know how to even begin to tell him, I have to tell you." "Oh dear," said Lily, heaving a huge sigh. "You know what? Quit worrying about what your father thinks about anything, or about where you choose to live. This is your life, my dear. He's living in Australia, and by the sounds of things, he's a very happy man these days, enjoying a new life with his wife. I say good for him. But likewise, Alicia, I also believe that you should be living your best life. You deserve that. And if your coming to the small town ruffles your father's feathers, well, it's tough, isn't it? You came here because by the sounds of things you want to be close to your late mother's memory, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. And if there are people who don't like it around here, including the Tanners, well, it's tough luck for them all. That's what I say." Alicia was extremely thankful to Lily for being so understanding about why she had impulsively purchased Primrose Cottage and moved to the small town. She had spent several days and nights with Lily at her cottage, and Kitty would often regularly visit to have a chat. They were fast becoming close friends. Alicia had grown comfortable with both Kitty and her mother. She was not surprised that Lily had been her mother's best friend, as Lily wore her heart on her sleeve, and it was impossible not to like her. Alicia was very delighted with the progress the contractors she had hired to fix up Primrose Cottage were making, and by the looks of things they were doing a stellar, exemplary job. Primrose Cottage was slowly but surely coming back to life, rather like a perennial flower that dies back for the winter season, and in early spring it shoots through the ground, astounding everyone with its awe-inspiring beauty. Alicia could not believe how magnificent Primrose Cottage was looking, with its lilac front door and matching shutters, and the interior of the cottage was taking form, and she had seen the floors and staircase being brought back to life, along with a new kitchen that boasted marble countertops and elegant cupboards that had been fitted superbly. Alicia had underestimated how good Primrose Cottage would actually look, with a little tender loving care. The yard had also been transformed, and it was showcasing a variety of lilac, purple, blue and pale pink flowers in the yard. The locals in town, on viewing the exterior of Primrose Cottage, would shake their heads in a somewhat stunned stupor and say, "Well, I never! I can't believe how enchanting Primrose Cottage looks. The transformation is absolutely miraculous. Who would have thought it? I would have only thought a wrecking ball was good for the place." Again and again many of the locals were quite taken aback by the visible metamorphosis of Primrose Cottage, that appeared to have risen like a phoenix from the ashes, and was fast becoming a showstopper. Alicia had still not plucked up the courage to phone her father in Australia and tell him that she was now living in the small town in Primrose Cottage, the same place he and her mother had originally purchased all those years ago. She had a horrible feeling that if she were to tell him the truth, it might really upset him, as the memories of his late wife would all come back to him in vivid detail, and could potentially make his grief 1,000 times worse, as although he'd moved on from his old life, he'd never ever got over losing Ruth, and Alicia knew that her father adored his new wife, but in his eyes no one could hold a candle to Ruth. But he had found happiness and love with another, for he didn't want to be alone all his life, as companionship was extremely important to him, and Alicia was the very first to understand that. She was glad to be staying in Lily's cottage for the time being, until the renovations to Primrose Cottage were finally complete. It had been a wonderful opportunity to learn things about her mother from Lily, that her father had failed to share with her over the years, probably because it pained him to talk about her. So often when Alicia had asked her father questions about her late mother, her father would completely shut down, look melancholic, and say very gingerly, "Sorry, Alicia. It pains me to talk to you about Ruth. If you don't mind, I'd rather not discuss her. I don't want to be reminded about that part of my life." Her father's evasiveness had really annoyed Alicia to a certain extent, so all she could do was look over photographs of her mother and try and imagine what her mother's personality had been like. So coming to this small town had enabled her to learn more and more about Ruth Beckett. Alicia had been putting off going to the local graveyard, simply because there was a small part of herself that was almost afraid to see her mother's final resting place. But one morning she plucked up the courage and borrowed Lily's bicycle, which had a basket in the front, and she popped over to Errol Lancaster's shop first, as he sold flowers as well as groceries, and a selection of very fine produce, of course. His face lifted at once with pleasure to see her again, and when she told him she wanted to buy some flowers for her mother's grave, he also gave her an extra bouquet, courtesy of him and his wife, to lay at her mother's grave on his behalf. "Thank you for the bouquet. It's beautiful, Errol. Very kind of you." "No, it's a pleasure. I'm glad you can lay them at your mother's grave on my behalf. I appreciate it." "Well, the truth is, Errol, I've never been to the grave before. This will be my first time," said Alicia soberly. "I guess I've been afraid to go there. I've been putting it off. But I need to take the plunge. I need to do this. It's important to me." "Well, I suppose I can understand that," said Errol sympathetically. "But you may find some peace being able to see the stone where your mother was laid to rest. It can bring many people comfort, you know." "You're probably right," Alicia admitted. "Maybe it will bring me some peace." It didn't take Alicia long to cycle down the long dirt road. She took a swift turning to the right, and finally to the left again, and 10 minutes later there she was, cycling up the open wrought-iron gates of the local cemetery. Errol Lancaster was right. The cemetery was a peaceful place. It didn't possess an airy, unwelcome energy. On the contrary, The energy was warmly welcoming. It was a fabulously beautiful morning, with a bright, energetic sunshine, wrapping its prisms of magnanimous warmth around her body in a generous hug. The graveyard was well maintained by the locals' townfolk, who took pride in keeping the cemetery looking extremely presentable, which was managed by a caretaker called Mr. Huggett. By the looks of things, Mr. Huggett also took pride in his job, for there was nothing forsaken about this cemetery. Alicia was somewhat surprised to find some of the stones in the cemetery went way back to the 1800s. Such graves were covered in moss and lichen. The names of the graves' occupants had long since been eroded by the passing of time. Some of these stones almost looked ancient. They were crooked and bent back, but all of them represented a soul that had lightly lived in this small town at one stage. But there were also modern gravestones on display, made out of a smart granite that twinkled in the sun. The graveyard was spread out over a wide, spacious area. The grass had been fastidiously mown, and beds of roses were ablaze with pretty, cheerful colours. They were obviously pruned in season and extremely well fertilized, for they filled the air with their scented perfumes. There were cobbled pathways through the graves for people to use as walkways to access different parts of the graveyard. Fringing the furthest edge of the cemetery was a dignified woodgrove of very imposing, tall, lofty trees. Some of them were ancient. Lily had told her that that woodgrove stretched back for many miles, leading out to an old logging road that was no longer in use. Alicia parked her bicycle against a red brick building, situated next to a whitewashed cottage that probably belonged to the cemetery caretaker, Mr. Huggett, for outside the little cottage was a welcome mat, and she noticed in the window blue and white checked tweed curtains were swinging in a light breeze, and that was when she saw a black and white cat sitting on the window ledge, looking at her through curious large yellow eyes. The cat contentedly stretched out a paw and yawned. Alicia could see it was bathing in the morning sunlight. She tapped the window to acknowledge the cat. "Hello there! Aren't you a pretty thing?" The cat stared back at her for a second, and then began to lick its paw. Alicia didn't know where her mother's grave would be found. The cemetery contained so many gravestones, much more than she would have anticipated for a small town, but she would find it soon enough, she was most sure. Alicia was curious as to who was buried here, for it might give her a better understanding of the town's history. She could hear the pretty chirrups of the birds' song as she sashayed down the cobbled paths, and in the distance, in close proximity to the woodgrove, she saw what looked like to be a long, very burly but elegant column, the kind of grave marker you would expect to belong to a prominent, affluent family of great importance. It was surrounded by a large heart-shaped flower bed made up of yellow daffodils. It really was a spectacular spot to be buried, she thought. Alicia wanted to find out who the grave belonged to. Imagine her surprise when she realized that the extravagant gravestone actually belonged to her late mother. She stood there staring at the gravestone in bemusement. She was overcome with a deep sense of emotion. She bent down and put the bouquets of flowers on the gravestone, and was surprised to see a vase that had been laid down in front of the stone, displaying a pretty bouquet of fresh pink peonies. It would seem all these years later, her mother was still being remembered by folk in this town, and that was very touching indeed. On the grave, Alicia noticed was her mother's date of birth and date of death, engraved very glamorously in the elegant stone. Then she read the words, "Those we love don't go away. They walk beside us every day, unseen, unheard, but always near, so loved, so missed, so very dear." For a moment Alicia was tongue-tied by this. This was her mother's resting place. She could hardly believe it. She almost needed to pinch herself. She bent down and stroked the granite slab, very affectionately, almost as if it was her late mother's arm. It was like Alicia needed to get close to her mother, the mother she'd never known in life, and this was her perfect opportunity. "Mum, it's me. I can't believe I found your resting place. You've got the best, most beautiful tombstone in the entire cemetery. It's so grand. I honestly thought it belonged to a prominent family that once lived in this town, but it's yours. And better still, it's the only grave surrounded by daffodils all in bloom. No one in this town has been able to forget you, Mum. Everybody remembers what happened that fateful day when Tommy Tanner ran you over." As Alicia spoke to her mother, a gentle wind whispered through the trees, almost as if responding to her words. "Mum, you probably know this already, but I've bought Primrose Cottage. I've moved into town. People have been so welcoming to me. Everybody is so kind. You're probably wondering why I came to town. The answer is, I don't really know. Not really. I guess I just thought coming here would make me feel closer to you. Seeing your resting place, well, it's such a beautiful setting, isn't it? And it's very reassuring to me. I think being here I feel so much closer to you. I can't believe Dad never told me about this cemetery or about your tombstone. If he'd done so, I promise you I'd have visited you a long time ago." All of a sudden, Alicia, as she was saying these things to her mother, she heard a strange but curious shuffling sound. Alicia looked around, wondering where the sound had come from. That was when she saw it, a small, very cute, human-like black face, with the most adorable treacle-coloured eyes, taking a sneak look at her behind her mother's grave. She was so taken aback by this that her mouth dropped wide open. She wondered what it was that she'd just seen, for the head suddenly disappeared. And just as Alicia was beginning to second-guess herself and wonder if she'd seen anything at all, the human face appeared again and was looking at her mischievously. "Hello there!" Alicia called out, but the face vanished all over again. And when she peered curiously behind the gravestone, nothing was there. She couldn't help but feel bitterly disappointed. For a second she glanced towards the tall lofty trees that fringed the woodgrove. She was sure the owner of the face was shielding itself behind a nearby tree and watching her from a distance. Alicia, who was naturally friendly by nature, began to vigorously wave towards the tree. As whoever it was that had been peering at her, she knew had possessed a very unthreatening juvenile childlike energy. As to what it was, she couldn't be sure. She was about to make tracks from the graveyard when she saw a stranger walking towards her mother's grave, with a purposeful, intentional stride, his shoulders slumped forward. He looked to be in his early 50s, with a full head of snow-white hair and a white beard. He was wearing a red bandana on his head and a red and black plaid shirt, and in his arms he was carrying a huge bouquet of lilac roses. Before Alicia could say anything, the stranger stood still for a second and gawked at her, as if he was bewildered to find someone standing next to her mother's grave. The man's face suddenly paled. The colour was stripped from his skin. His piercing blue eyes widened in horror, and all he could say was, "No! Please, God, no! Ruth! Oh, my God, Ruth! Is that really you?" Then the unthinkable happened. The man fainted, collapsing on the ground in a heap, showering everything in a plethora of lilac petals, as a bouquet of roses was stripped from his hands, liberally scattering around him, and it would seem he was out for the count. "What the hell?" thought Alicia, scrambling hurriedly towards the stranger, dropping urgently to her knees, as she crouched over him, wondering what could have possibly caused him to collapse in the way he'd done. Had he had a heart attack, perhaps? A stroke? She didn't have her phone with her. She needed to call for help, but no one was around. Maybe if she knocked on the caretaker's whitewashed cottage, she could get help. That was the place she'd seen the cat cleaning his paws in the window. First, she needed to check the man's vitals to ensure he was still breathing. She reached for the stranger's pulse. She started slapping his face to try and bring him out of his comatose state. "Are you all right, sir? Are you all right? Can you hear me?" she said, her worried eyes staring into the man's face. Thank God he was breathing. She wouldn't have to give him CPR. The man opened his blue eyes in horror as he stared at Alicia and said, "Ruth! Ruth, is that you? It can't possibly be. It can't be. It can't be, can it?" Alicia suddenly realized the stranger, probably on seeing her, assumed he was seeing her mother's ghost. She smiled at the stranger awkwardly. "I'm not a ghost, sir. I'm real. You can pinch me if you like." The man sat up abruptly, lifting his upper back and head off the ground. He stared at Alicia with bemused eyes. "What the hell? Who are you? He asked rather abruptly. You look like the late Ruth Becker. Who are you? I thought you were Ruth's ghost. You gave me quite the scare. You look uncannily like her. That's because I am Ruth Becker's daughter. My name is Alicia Becker. Good Lord! Are you telling me that you were the baby knocked out of her pram when my son Tommy ran your mother over in the road? He was 12 years old at the time. A day doesn't go by when I don't grieve the passing of your mother. I always lay roses or flowers at her grave to pay my respects every week religiously. I am so desperately sorry for what my son did all those years ago, running over your mother in the car. He was an absolute idiot taking my car like that. He didn't even know how to drive at the time. He was showing off to his best friend Liam. I don't want to make any excuses for my son, really I don't. But I assure you, at the time he was a rambunctious 12-year-old, very foolish boy. Sometimes he could be his own worst enemy. And when he took a joyride that fateful afternoon, well, it was the worst day of my life. Let's just say, when I realized what my son had done, I was devastated. There are no words, no words. Oh, you're Mr. Tanner then, said Alicia. I'm so pleased to finally make your acquaintance, Mr. Tanner. I sincerely doubt you mean that, said Mr. Tanner. You're just being very kind, young lady. Why would you be pleased to meet the likes of me, after what my Tommy did to your mother? I cannot even comprehend. I would expect you would want to have nothing to do with the likes of me. On the day your mother died, your father came over to my house. He punched me so many times, I became concussed, and I was sent for a couple of days in hospital for observation. I couldn't blame your father for being so angry. Had I been wearing his shoes, I'd probably have done much the same. I'm sorry my father did that to you, Mr. Tanner. I can't apologize enough. It's not like him to behave like that. He wasn't in his right mind. Look, Mr. Tanner, said Alicia, wrapping the somewhat startled man in an effusive warm hug that he certainly hadn't seen coming. Stop blaming yourself from what happened all those years ago. What happened to my mother is hardly your fault, and I don't blame you, nor do I blame Tommy. You don't? Asked Mr. Tanner, looking somewhat bemused. But why not? Tommy killed your mother. He's my son. At the very least you should blame me for raising my son to be so very irresponsible. Alicia rolled her eyes. No parent is responsible for their children's actions. Not every time. Sometimes children do things that are out of their parents' control. It's not your fault. Mr. Tanner, boys at the age of 12, well, they can be really unruly, doing really a whole lot of foolish things. Yes, it was devastating what happened to my mother, but it happened over 25 years ago. You need to stop beating yourself up about it. This can't be good for your health, you know. Mr. Tanner shook his head sadly. There were tears in his eyes. Your mother was a wonderful woman. She lit up the place wherever she went. It's a tragedy she died before her time. It just isn't fair, is it? I would have gladly taken her place in a heartbeat. But I couldn't, unfortunately. But I would have done so in a second. Of course it's tragic. But think about it, Mr. Tanner. Tragedy does happen in people's lives. There's nothing you can do about it. If we could travel back in time and change things, of course we would. But that's not a possibility. So we have to move on, don't we? We have to be strong. We have to be courageous. My father forgave Tommy a long time ago, Mr. Tanner. He said if he didn't forgive your son, he'd be an absolute hypocrite. Because guess what? At the same age, he set the yard shed in his parents' home on fire, by mistake, of course. His mother was furious. And then another time, he tried to make chips for himself. He was 12 years old also. He had got home from school, and then he got distracted by the dog, who'd run off into the yard with a trainer in his mouth. My dad was very proud of those trendy trainers of his. He knew if he didn't remove the trainer from the dog's jaws, they'd be absolutely ruined. So he ran around the yard chasing the dog, who thought it was all a lovely game. He tried to retrieve his trainer. All the while he completely forgot that he had a pot of hot oil on the stove. Luckily my grandmother returned home in the nick of time. She managed to put the fire out. If she hadn't returned home when she did, that old Victorian house would have been reduced to cinder. I'm most sure of that. So let's not kid, bad things can happen when you're a young child, not really aware of the consequences of some of your actions. What I'm trying to say, Mr. Tanner, is things happen. So I'm begging you to let what happened to my mother go. It wasn't your fault.
You are very sweet, just like your mother was in life, young lady. Very kind of you to say these nice things to me.
I'm not being kind, Mr. Tanner. I'm being sincere. Children do stupid things, especially boys who are more experimental than girls. I mean, how can a parent be expected to have eyes in the back of their heads?
Well, you're right on that one. I dare say even when I was a young boy of 12 years old, I got up to all kinds of nonsense. But Tommy, at 12 he was particularly mischievous. But after he ran over your mother, he withdrew into his shell for a long while. He became very responsible. I guess he learnt a very hard, very bitter lesson.
Tell me, Mr. Tanner, how is your son Tommy?
Well, he's very well. Of course, he felt very aggrieved by what he'd done to your mother all those years ago. But he was young at the time. He barely remembers what happened. He's married now very happily with 2 children of his own. And I know when they're old enough to drive, Tommy will never let them do what he did all those years ago to your mother.
Well, I'm glad to hear he hasn't been punishing you in the way that you have been punishing yourself, Mr. Tanner. Promise me that you'll forgive yourself for what happened to my mother. How often do you come to this graveyard?
I try to come here twice a week, said Mr. Tanner. It gives me a great deal of peace laying down flowers at your mother's grave.
This is a huge grave, Mr. Tanner. I understand you paid and erected it on my mother's behalf. When I saw the grave, I thought it belonged to an affluent family. You must have spent a fortune on it.
It was the least I could do. Besides, I do know that your mother loved trees. I wanted to get her a plot close to the wood grove over there. I knew your mother obviously appreciated yellow, because when she walked you around town in that pram of yours, you were always wearing yellow. So I guessed yellow must be a favourite colour of hers. So I ensured there were daffodils around her grave, done in the shape of a heart. It is very pretty, is it not?
You're very kind, Mr. Tanner.
So what are you doing in town, young lady? Asked Mr. Tanner. Your father left this place 25 years ago or so. No one has seen him since. I don't think he ever came back even to visit the cemetery or the grave where his wife is buried. But I suppose he never wanted to come back to the town. Maybe it was just too painful for him.
Well, you're right about that, Mr. Tanner. I want you to know my father has moved on with his life. He's very happily married now, and he's now living in Australia.
Good Lord,
said Mr. Tanner, wiping some sweat away from his forehead. He finally rose to his feet.
I didn't expect your father had emigrated from the country. I'm very pleased you say he's a happy man these days. That's very good news. I worried about him a great deal, you know, after your mother's passing. You didn't answer my one question. What on earth are you doing here in town?
Well, I've brought Primrose Cottage, haven't I? I don't know if you've noticed, but the place is being fixed up at the moment.
Oh, now that makes sense. You're the new owner of Primrose Cottage. Good Lord, I'm so pleased to see what you've done to the place. When I watched that beautiful, beautiful cottage descend into decay because of Dorothy Edge and her negligence. Bless her soul, a very nice lady she was, but she didn't do much about the upkeep of the place. Your mother made that beautiful cottage the prettiest cottage in town, and after I saw it falling apart, I thought that Primrose Cottage could never be resurrected from the dead. But you proved me wrong on that one. Good on you for fixing the cottage up. But I would have thought coming back to a town where your mother's life was taken from her far too soon would be far too painful for someone like you."
Alicia shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly. "My father could never come back to this town. Not permanently, of course. I suspect it would be too painful for him. I was a baby when the tragedy happened, Mr. Tanner, so of course I have no recollection of it. But I feel connected to Primrose Cottage. Maybe it was because I was born on the kitchen floor there, and for me it's like going back to my roots. I know my father would probably never understand that, but I feel connected to my mother here."
"Ah, I remember that story about you being born on the kitchen floor at Primrose Cottage," said Mr. Tanner, chuckling. "It was all over town after your mother gave birth to you there. Your father delivered you before the medics even got to the cottage in time. It seemed you were very eager to be born."
"I suppose I was, but perhaps it was because I really liked this town, and I really do, and all its people, Mr. Tanner, including you. Coming here really does make me feel close to my late mother. I had no idea she had a gravestone that I could visit here, so this has been a very pleasant surprise to me, and today is my first time that I've actually visited it."
"Well, for the record, I'm very, very glad you're back in town. But I am surprised that none of the locals have mentioned it to me that you were coming back. For nothing ever stays secret in this town for very long."
"I don't think people wanted you to know I was here, to tell you the truth, Mr. Tanner. They thought it might be very upsetting and distressing for you to know that I was back, bringing back old history, so to speak. They thought you'd suffered enough."
"Well, it's funny the way people think. It's kind that they're concerned about me," said Mr. Tanner. "To tell you the truth, I suspect I would have fretted had I known you were back. But meeting you has changed everything. In fact, this morning I feel as if a heavy burden has been lifted off my heart. I feel a whole lot lighter after meeting you. And I can assure you, I have not felt this way in a long time. Your forgiveness means the world to me. And it would mean a lot to Tommy as well. I'm most sure of that."
"As I keep telling you, Mr. Tanner, there's nothing to forgive. Things happen. Tragedy happens every day all around the world, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. And it just is part of what life is, the tapestry of life, I suspect. Anyway, it's always best to move on from things like that, don't you think?"
"You're very right, young lady. You speak a lot of common sense."
Mr. Tanner bent down in what you would describe as a downward dog, yoga-like position, to pick up what was left of the disfigured purple roses lying on the ground. He placed them in Ruth's grave, and Alicia and Mr. Tanner stood side by side, staring at the gravestone for a long moment. Then all of a sudden, Alicia saw the face again, staring at her mischievously from behind the gravestone. Mr. Tanner had seen the face as well. The face peered at them curiously, and rather reticently came out of its hiding place. Mr. Tanner's jaw dropped to the ground. Alicia began to blink, as if she was almost certain what she was seeing just could not be real, could it? But standing before them, larger than life, was a little 3-foot Bigfoot, with a playful, boyish energy, and he stared at both Alicia and Mr. Tanner with an inquisitiveness that was so palpable you could almost touch it. The cute little Bigfoot had a pear in his hand, which he had probably intended to give to Alicia, but remembering to mind his manners, he split the pear in 2 halves very neatly and gave Alicia and Mr. Tanner half of the pear each. Then he waited for them expectantly to take a bite. Alicia did not want to offend the little Bigfoot, so she took a large bite out of the pear and made some exaggerated noises in her throat as to how much she was thoroughly enjoying eating it. The pear was indeed sweet and juicy. Mmm! 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 Now, that is delicious! Oh, my word! What a juicy pear this is! Yummy! Mr. Tanner followed Alicia's example, and he took a great big bite out of the half-piece of pear and made some appreciative noises in the back of his throat.
"Oh, delicious! Oh, what a sweet, juicy pear this is!"
The little Bigfoot's face lit up with delight. Seconds later he was gone, like a shooting star, and came running back with 2 more pairs, which he gave to both Mr. Tanner and Alicia. There was an expression of delighted expectation written all over his cute little face, rather like when a child feeds a dog a special treat and gets some kind of emotional reward from the dog's enthusiasm as it gobbles it up. It was as if the little male Bigfoot was waiting to be rewarded by Alicia and Mr. Tanner's reaction to the juicy pair. It was obviously a big deal for him to part with such a treat. Alicia sensed the little Bigfoot had the kindest of hearts, so she certainly didn't want to be ungrateful or nonchalant about the gift that she could so easily pick up at the corner store from Mr. Lancaster's delectable fresh produce. She was determined to make the Bigfoot happy, so she began to eat the pear with an exaggerated enthusiasm, as if it was quite possibly the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted in her entire life. She made all the yummy noises in the back of her throat that she felt would be pleasing for the little Bigfoot, and it certainly seemed to work, for his big treacle-colour eyes twinkled joyfully, and he began to chuckle at Alicia's performance, for it pleased him greatly. "Oh, my word! The first pear you gave me was yummy, but this is even more delicious. It is so sweet and tasty, so very juicy. Yummy! This is delicious. You need to taste yours, Mr. Tanner." Not to be outdone by Alicia's masterful performance, Mr. Tanner, who'd never been the best actor in the world, followed Alicia's example, while the Bigfoot watched him bite into his pear, which was so juicy some of the juice trickled down his cheek and gathered around his white beard.
Delicious, absolutely delicious. Very, very good. Thank you, young man, for this lovely gift,"
said Mr. Tanner, continuing to make some suitable noises in the back of his throat. The Bigfoot chuckled again happily, for he had been entertained by the both of them, and was satisfied by their appreciative performances. It was as if he had that innocent childlike charm, and that eagerness to please, which made the little Bigfoot seem all the more endearing. All of a sudden the little Bigfoot looked slightly alarmed, momentarily disquieted. His kind dark eyes widened, becoming extremely round, when a loud whistle rang out from the woodgrove, almost as if the owner of the whistle was calling him. It was as if the little Bigfoot had known running off into the graveyard like this, and communicating with humans, was not exactly permitted. He glanced rather anxiously towards the woodgrove, with the look of a nervous child that has been caught by its mother with its hand in the cookie jar. He let out a return whistle, and then darted straight back to the woodgrove at a lightning speed. In the distance, both Alicia and Mr. Tanner could see a vague, tall, shadowy figure, that they couldn't make out very well because it was so ambiguous, but they assumed it must be the Bigfoot's mother. She was obscure and foggy. You couldn't see her clearly. The 2 figures just appeared to vanish, and for a long while Alicia and Mr. Tanner didn't say a word to each other. They had been shell-shocked by what had just happened. No one would have expected a casual visit to a graveyard would lead to an encounter with a little male Bigfoot that had seemed determined to interact with the both of them, despite its obvious reticence. Finally, Mr. Tanner broke the silence. At this point he was rubbing his long, wispy white beard in a gesture of uncertainty that so often comes when someone has experienced something a little out of the normal.
"Good Lord," said Mr. Tanner. "Did that really happen? I'm trying to make sense of it all. I was about to faint a second time today. This has been the most idiosyncratic, unorthodox day of my life. I thought Bigfoots were, legendary creatures, but we've just seen a little Bigfoot, and I'm in shock. Look at me," he said, shaking. He lifted up his arm so that Alicia could see it was actually trembling.
"But you weren't scared of the little Bigfoot, were you, Mr. Tanner? He was so sweet, so unthreatening."
"Of course he was sweet and unthreatening, and I wasn't scared of him. I'm shaking because I'm taken aback, because I'm so bewildered, so caught off guard, you could say. I am in shock. It'll take me a while to recover. I've been visiting this graveyard now for 25 years, twice a week. I visit your mother's grave all the time, and nothing like this has ever happened to me before, until you came along, Alicia. Are you one of these people that attracts unusual things to yourself? Because it would certainly seem so.
Absolutely not, Mr. Tanner. I'm as taken aback as you are. I'm also bewildered.
Well done for eating the pear in the way you did, and pretending it was the most delicious thing you'd ever tasted. I was impressed with your performance, and the Bigfoot really liked it. I had to follow your lead, because I could see that Bigfoot expected me to express some form of enthusiasm when I ate into the pear.
Well, credit to you, Mr. Tanner. You did enormously well. You were very convincing when you were eating the pear. Although, granted, I will say this, it was delicious. I wonder where the Bigfoot got the pears from.
Oh, that's very easy, said Mr. Tanner. There's an orchard of pear trees not far from here. The owner of that orchard sells some of his pears to Mr. Lancaster himself. So they're in season. So no prizes for guessing where those pears actually come from. There's always an excess in those orchards of his.
Should we tell anyone about the Bigfoot we saw, Mr. Tanner? Asked Alicia. I'm not sure anyone would believe our story. Mr. Tanner looked thoughtful for a moment.
No, it's not a good idea. For a start, people would likely think we were making it up. And you don't want people thinking that about you.
But we both saw the little Bigfoot, Mr. Tanner. He was real. This wasn't in our imagination.
True enough, he was real. But think about it. And let's just say people do believe our account. If it's all around town that you and I encountered the little chappie, here by your mother's gravestone, people might descend on this graveyard like a flock of very annoying geese, hoping to have an encounter with the little Bigfoot themselves. And I can guarantee that to a very private Bigfoot, and that's what I imagine he is. You saw how reticent the little thing was. You saw the mother. She was standing behind the tree. We couldn't see her very clearly, could we, because it was too far away for us. But I am quite sure she is even more aloof than her little son is. And those Bigfoot will not appreciate their privacy being eroded like this.
You're right, Mr. Tanner. I shan't tell anyone about our encounter. It's our secret. It would seem that encountering the little Bigfoot meant that Mr. Tanner and Alicia had bonded in a rather unusual way at the cemetery. Alicia was invited on several occasions to have dinner with the Tanner family, and it was as if all the pain from the past had been wiped away. Mrs. Tanner took Alicia to one side and personally thanked her.
My husband is a new man, thanks to you. Ever since you ran into him at the graveyard, he has got a glow to him these days. I think meeting you has brought him so much immeasurable peace. He always went to that graveyard twice a week, you know, for the last 25 years or so, to lay flowers very faithfully at your mother's grave. He blames himself for what happened to your mother all those years ago. I always tell him it was not his fault, but he never listened to me. He feels dreadfully responsible for your mother's tragic death. I always remind him that Tommy was 12 years old at the time. Kids that age can be absolute rascals, can they not? And there are times that a parent can't be watching their kid 24/7. But my assurances to my husband over the years have fallen on deaf ears until he met you, until you spoke some common sense to him. I've finally got my husband back. He's full of smiles now and jokes all the time. And you know what? I attribute this to you, Alicia. You've made him realize that accidents do happen, and he wasn't to blame for Tommy's objectionable behavior that day. He told me, of course, how he fainted in the graveyard when he saw you, because you're the spitting image of your mother. I found that very amusing, said Mrs. Tanner with a light laugh that sounded more like a musical note. Well, believe me, said Alicia, I did freak out myself when your husband fainted. I thought he'd had a heart attack in front of me. But then I realized when he kept calling me Ruth that he thought I was my mother's ghost. It was hilariously funny, but not at the time, I can assure you. Mrs. Tanner nodded her head. Honestly, what are the people in this town like? They were extremely naughty not telling us that you had bought Primrose Cottage and moved into town. Did they not realize how shocking it might be for my husband to potentially run into you like that, when you look so uncannily like your late mother? Honestly, if the truth be told, I'm not remotely surprised he thought you were her ghost. When you first came through our front door, I personally did a double take. I could hardly believe it, because honestly, I'm not even under-exaggerating when I say you are your mother's double. I knew I looked a lot like my mother, but I didn't think my likeness to her would startle so many people as it clearly has done. I'm sorry I shocked both you and your husband. Mrs. Tanner gave Alicia's shoulder a nudge. I don't think you need to be sorry about anything, dear. Your coming back to this small town is the best thing that has ever happened to the Tanner family. I'd never have believed that that was possible, but the change in my husband's personality is utterly remarkable thanks to you. He's back to the wonderful man I married before the tragic accident ever occurred, and I, for one, am so delighted about that. Alicia was regularly invited to dinner at the Tanner home, and one night Tommy Tanner was in attendance at dinner, along with the Tanner's youngest son, who was a year older than Alicia. His name was Cullen. Tommy Tanner was apologetic about driving over Alicia's mother all those years ago, and the two embraced in a warm, very emotional hug, while Tommy shed a few tears. "It's all over and done with," said Alicia. "Don't get upset. We move on from here now. You were young at the time. These things happen. You're absolutely forgiven, so don't be so hard on yourself."
"But I hate what I did all those years ago," said Tommy Tanner. "I can't believe what a prize idiot I was."
What nobody could have anticipated was when Alicia and Cullen Tanner laid eyes on each other for the first time, there were fireworks between the two of them, a very definite chemistry that could not be denied. Alicia was extremely worried that Cullen would never ask her out, based on what had happened to her mother all those years ago, but Cullen did not disappoint. They went out on their very first date, and within a year the two of them were engaged. Alicia knew telling her father that she was marrying a Tanner would not go down well with him. She hadn't even told him she'd bought Primrose Cottage. She had delayed telling him that, or that she'd moved to the small town. She hadn't had the courage to tell him this to date, but now she was marrying a Tanner in 6 months' time, so the cat would finally have to be let out of the bag. Alicia was shaking as she called her father in Australia. "Hi, Dad," she said.
"Alicia,"
said her father, sounding delighted.
"How lovely to hear from you. This has been a while coming. I've been thinking about you as it happens. How are things going for you in New York?"
"Well, actually, Dad, I asked Granny not to tell you, but I'm not actually living in New York anymore. I haven't been living there for quite a while, actually."
"Good Lord, Alicia, you are a dark horse. Why would you keep something like this from me? Your job is in New York, is it not?"
"Yes, it's in New York, but I'm very fortunate, Dad. These days, a lot of people can work from home because of technology and stuff, and I'm one of those fortunate people, it would seem."
"Well, you are very fortunate to be able to work from home. There's no doubt about that. It wasn't like that in my time. So where is this new home of yours, then?" asked her father rather gingerly. "Why didn't you tell me you'd moved, Alicia? Why all this secrecy? You're normally so straightforward about things. What's going on?"
"Well, I didn't want to tell you I'd moved."
"But why ever not, love? You don't have to keep secrets from me. I'm an open book."
"It's just complicated, Dad, that's all."
"Moving is not complicated, love. In my experience, most things in life are pretty straightforward."
"Dad, I wasn't sure how you'd react, that's all, when I told you the truth."
"Why are you speaking in riddles, Alicia? You know you can tell me anything. If this is about your grandmother being lonely because you're no longer living in New York, you don't have to worry about that. Your grandmother is a very independent woman. She's got lots of friends. So if you don't live in New York, it really does not matter."
"Dad, it's not about Granny. It's what I've got to say to you that I'm concerned about. I'm sorry, you're not going to like it."
What is it that I'm not going to like, Alicia? Why don't I like the sound of this? You're making me very, very nervous.
Well, because I don't think you're going to like what I have to tell you. But I'm going to say it anyway, Dad. I bought Primrose Cottage. I'm living in the small town you and Mum moved to 25 years ago or so.
You what?
Came her father's shocked response.
Is this some kind of weird joke, Alicia?
No, Dad, it's not a joke. I really have purchased Primrose Cottage. You should have seen the state the place was in when I initially purchased it. It was falling apart. A woman called Dorothy Edge was living there. She was a hoarder, and you can't believe it, everything was crumbling. But I've sorted it out.
I don't care what kind of a state Primrose Cottage was in, Alicia, when you bought it. Why would you want to go back to a cottage me and your mother bought all those years ago and hash up all the pain of the past? I don't even want to think about that small town ever again. What on earth is wrong with you? Why would you go back there?
Dad, the last thing I want to do is to upset you. That's why I never told you about what I did. About buying Primrose Cottage, I mean.
Well, you're doing a great job of doing that, love, keeping secrets. Did you not realize I want to forget about that part of my life? And now you're hashing it up all over again. Thanks for that.
Dad, this isn't about you. Don't take it so personally. This is about me. That's why I didn't tell you about this. I didn't want to hurt you. But I really, really wanted to move here. It's hard to explain.
But why the hell would you want to do that, Alicia? It makes no sense to me. What am I not getting here? Why would you want to go chasing after the ghosts of the past? You'll only get yourself badly hurt, opening up old family wounds like this.
I wanted to be close to Mum, Dad. I know she's dead, but I feel connected to her in this town. By the way, I visited her grave at the cemetery. Why on earth didn't you tell me about Mum's burial place? I can't believe, Dad, you gave me the impression that Mum's ashes were sprinkled out at sea. That wasn't true. Why did you deceive me like that? There was a long, rather uncomfortable and awkward pause at the other end of the line, and Alicia could hear her father making an awkward grunting-like sound.
I'm sorry, love. I admit that was wrong for me to do, very wrong. I'm not proud of myself. I didn't tell you about your mother's gravesite. I just didn't want you going there, did I? I didn't want you visiting the place. I didn't want all that history being hashed up like it's obviously being hashed up now. I just thought it would cause a great deal of upset. I thought it was best to let sleeping dogs lie. I just thought it was better not to mention it all. I know it was wrong of me. I do apologize.
Dad, it was very upsetting not to know about Mum's resting place. What you did was not acceptable. I spoke to Granny, and she was also under the impression you had scattered Mum's ashes out to sea. You kept the secret from the both of us, and that was not kind of you.
Look, love, your mother's death broke my heart, you know it did. I was worried if I ever went back to the town and visited your mum's grave, it would bring back so many painful memories, excruciatingly painful memories. I wanted to draw a line in the sand, didn't I, for the both of us? Is that so hard for you to understand? So I suspect you now have seen what an incredibly over-the-top grave it is in that graveyard that Mr. Tanner erected. Honestly, that man, he just built the most ridiculously extravagant gravestone to remember your mother by. It was over the top, if you ask me, but I suppose it was his way of making an apology to her. But it didn't wash with me for a second.
Dad, I thought you had forgiven Tommy Tanner and the Tanner family. Why do I feel as if you're still harbouring residual animosity towards them, so to speak?
I have forgiven the Tanners, and I've forgiven Tommy Tanner. I don't feel animosity towards them, love. I've moved on from there. Tommy Tanner was only 12 years old when it happened. He was devastated about what he did to your mother. But it still doesn't take away the fact that your mother died tragically. And that town, along with Primrose Cottage, is for me the scene of great devastation.
Dad, what Mr. Tanner did was very kind. I think he erected a fabulous gravestone to remember Mum by. It's a kind tribute to who she was in life. Mr. Tanner visits Mum's grave twice a week and has done so for the last 25 years, I'll have you know.
He's never been able to come to terms with Mum's death, but I told him to let it all go. It's not as if what happened to Mum is his fault anyway, and no one ever should go through life weighed down by guilt, should they?
Absolutely not, love. I agree with you on that. I'm very sorry to hear Mr. Tanner blames himself for your mother's passing. It wasn't his fault. It was a terrible accident. But why are you talking to me about Mr. Tanner?
Because he's a nice man, Dad, that's why. And he lives in town. And I can hardly avoid him, can I? There's something else you should know, Dad. And I don't know how to tell you this. I don't know how you're going to react, actually. And I'm quite nervous to tell you.
Well, frankly, love, you've told me you've moved into Primrose Cottage in the small town. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't think there's anything you could say that could be more shocking than that to me.
Dad, Mr. Tanner is soon to become my father-in-law.
What? Is this some kind of weird joke, love? Don't tell me you're going to marry the young boy who killed your mother. No way. You can't be doing that.
No, I'm not marrying Tommy Tanner, Dad. I'm marrying his younger brother. He's a year older than me. His name is Cullen. We've fallen hard for each other, really hard, Dad. I really, really love him. I'm sorry if this has upset you, but you can't help who you fall in love with, can you, Dad? And I've fallen in love with a Tanner.
So let's get this right. You're going to marry the brother of the young man that ran your mother down in the road and tipped you out of your pram. Are you absolutely insane, love? I can't believe you're telling me this. It all feels like a bad, bad dream.
I know how it sounds, Dad, and it probably does sound bad to you, and I apologise for that, but I'm not insane. I really am not. I'm in love with this man. I'm in love with Cullen Tanner. It is what it is. I can't change the way I feel. I wouldn't deliberately choose to fall in love with a Tanner, Dad, but that's what's happened. And I really love the Tanner family. Mrs. Tanner is amazing. Mr. Tanner is the nicest man you could ever hope to meet, and I'm genuinely glad he's going to be my father-in-law. And as for Cullen Tanner, well, he's just absolutely wonderful. I just have fallen for him hard. And I've got to know Tommy Tanner, Dad, and he is so apologetic for what happened. He can't believe what he did when he was 12 years old. We all make mistakes, don't we? You've got to let your deep inner anger go, Dad.
Look, I can't stop you from marrying Cullen, can I? If you say you love him so much. So my opinion doesn't really count for much, does it anyway, because you're going to marry him whether I like it or not? Apart from anything else, it may surprise you to know, Alicia, but your happiness matters more to me than anything else in the world. But you must forgive me if I'm not ecstatic about what you've just told me. It's going to take a while to soak in before I get my head around this. I hope you appreciate that. But if you love the man, then you must marry him. I can't stop you from doing that.
Of course I love him, Dad, and I love you too. I'll speak to you later when you're ready to talk about this. Think about everything I've told you. I know it's a bit of a bombshell.
You can tell me that, love. I'll speak to you later. Let me think about everything.
Alicia had been relieved that the conversation with her father had gone marginally better than she had anticipated. So later that day she decided to take some flowers to the graveyard, to have a chat with her mother, to tell her everything that had been going on. Alicia found great comfort in going to visit her mother's grave and talking to her about her life and her romantic relationship with Cullen in the small town. She'd hoped to have another sighting of the little Bigfoot that had given her and Mr. Tucker a pair, but to date there had been no sign of the little thing. Unbeknown to Alicia, that was all about to change that afternoon. Alicia had brought a bunch of colourful roses from Mr. Lancaster at the corner shop in town, and she'd made her merry way to the graveyard on her bicycle, as she regularly did. The cemetery greeted her again with its warm, very laid-back benevolence, for she had never found visiting this cemetery remotely sinister. Indeed, coming here and sitting among the graves brought her so much comfort. These days Alicia and Cullen lived happily together in Primrose Cottage, so she was able to visit her mother's grave regularly, and it made her feel close to her mother. She placed the roses in a glass vase, which she filled with water, and put it on the gravestone. "Mum, it's me," she said. I did the deed. Can you believe it? I did the deed, Mum. Believe me, it took so many guts. But finally I did it. I told Dad that I'm getting married to Cullen Tanner and that we love each other very much. I don't think he was very impressed by the whole thing. The conversation didn't go as badly as I thought, though. I think he'll eventually come around. But let's just say I don't think he was best pleased, not exactly thrilled, so to speak. As Alicia said this, she observed a red cardinal perched on an overhanging tree branch. She almost went white. Was this a sign that she had her mother's blessing to marry Cullen? She was sure of it. The red cardinal was watching her through its dark eyes. Then it promptly flew away, and there were chills running down her spine. The good kind, of course. The graveyard remained very quiet, and Alicia sat by her mother's grave for a moment, enjoying the warm sunshine for a bit. All of a sudden she felt a presence. She turned around quickly, expecting to see Mr. Tanner standing there. But it was not Mr. Tanner she saw. It was the little Bigfoot that she'd seen the year before. Although he was now significantly taller, he was about 5 foot tall instead of 3. And in his hand he had a pear, which he handed to her. Alicia knew what to do. She took the pear and a bite out of it, and she exaggerated how much she was enjoying it. "This is delicious, yummy, yummy. Wow, what a treat! Thank you so much." His bright eyes grew round, and he looked delighted by Alicia's enthusiasm. But all of a sudden he looked nervously towards the woodgrove, as if he knew what he was doing was really naughty. There was a shrill whistle coming from the woods, and there again Alicia could see a tall figure that she couldn't make out very clearly, but she knew it was the Bigfoot's mother, obviously standing by the trees watching the pair of them. Alicia was sure the little Bigfoot would likely get into big trouble with his mother, because he gave her one more glance and then hurriedly darted back to the trees. Alicia could not help but chuckle to herself, wondering if she'd ever see the little Bigfoot again. He was probably in for quite the scolding with his mother right now. In the years that followed, Alicia sadly never saw the little Bigfoot again, although there were many times when visiting her mother's grave, she found there were pears left on the gravesite for her, which she was sure were gifted to her by the little Bigfoot. Alicia is now happily married to Cullen Tanner. She lives in Primrose Cottage, and the pair have 3 children together, 2 boys and a little girl. It would seem that Alicia's father has reached a place of acceptance in his life, so he regularly, with his Australian wife, visits the small town to see his grandchildren. It would seem the wounds of the past and all the pain after Alicia's mother's passing have been ironed away, and these days Mr. Tanner is a very happy man, no longer carrying the guilt around with him of what Tommy did all those years ago. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.